Hi, and I'm live with Bradley and Jeff. I'm going to talk about the television movie of Homicide: Life on the Streets, broadcast in the year 2000. Over to Jeff.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. February 13th, 2000, to be exact. And which was a little less than a year after the completion of the series. And it was written by the series head writer Tom Fontana and staff writers Eric Overmyer and James Yoshimura, and directed by Jean de Segonza, who had served as a cinematographer and director several times during the show's run. So, retired police lieutenant Al Giardello is running for mayor. Among his platform is drug legalization, and he seems to be the front runner when he is suddenly shot at a press conference by an unseen gunman. Although that's not technically true, the gunman is seen. We just don't know it yet. Anyway, unconscious, he is rushed to the hospital. In a montage sequence, each of the detectives who used to work for him during the show's 7-year run learns of the shooting and rushes to the squad room. While some of the detectives are still working homicide, most have either quit the force, retired, or transferred to other departments. Particular attention is paid to Frank Pimbleton, who is now working as a college professor, and Mike Giardello, who has quit the FBI and is now working as a uniformed police officer. At the squad room, all of the detectives, past and present, clamor for an opportunity to help find the shooter. There they find that Stuart Gardy is now shift commander, despite his little editorial comment from the person writing this, despite his complete lack of either qualification or leadership. I don't know. That's kind of harsh. But anyway, Captain Roger Gaffney, who has previously shown overt signs of racism and has a particular dislike of Pimbleton, allows all of the white former detectives to aid in the investigation, but forbids Pimbleton from participating. When Pimbleton tells Gardy he has never respected him but finds his behavior now simply unbelievable, Gardy admits that he was promoted to shift commander because he knew his time as a detective was nearing the end and the bosses wanted someone they could push around in the spot. In defiance and out of respect for Pimbleton's excellent work as a detective, Gardy secretly permits Pimbleton to temporarily rejoin the unit, and teams him with Detective Tim Bayliss, who has been on an extended leave of absence, or as Lewis put it, an extended leave of his senses. Just as Bayliss and Pimbleton have been partners for most of the series run, John Munch, who now works at the Special Victims Unit in New York City, is temporarily reteamed with his old partner, the retired Stanley Bolander. As videographer J.H. Brody examines video footage of the shooting, the detectives dispersed throughout Baltimore, following various leads. Actually, I think Brody just showed up at the hospital. He wasn't really looking at it. Anyway, somebody writing this didn't follow along very carefully.
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to say, yeah, we got to bring that guy in.
Yeah. Others involving various cases Giardello worked while lieutenant at Homicide. Meanwhile, G's son is under the dual strain of intense media attention and worrying about his father. He eventually manages to evade the press and is approached by Mike Kellerman, who offers an arrangement. Kellerman uses his PI skills and contacts to track down some of Giardello's old enemies, and that didn't really happen either. And then stands guard as Mike Giardello tries to beat information out of him. That part was true, and hilariously is eating something different in each scene. A subplot involves Bayliss and Pimbleton rekindling their bond despite having seen very little of each other during the past 2 years. Bayliss guesses that Pimbleton misses being a homicide detective and may even return one day, but while Pimbleton admits that he sometimes misses the job, he insists he could never return because he felt that his soul was weighed down a little more each time a suspect confessed a crime. This being a reference to Pimbleton's unparalleled talent for convincing suspects to confess during interrogations. Anyway, I think he was kind of BSing some of that, but I'll get into that later. The two men solve the case when video evidence leads them to a grieving father whose honor roll son died of an overdose while experimenting with drugs. The father, believing that G's drug legalization platform would lead to more young deaths, first shot him at the rally and later infiltrated the hospital to attempt to shoot him again, but shot one of the doctors who was treating him. Bayliss later sacrifices his friendship with Pimbleton by forcing him to listen to one last confession, as Bayliss admits to murdering Luke Ryland, the internet killer who had been released on a technicality in the final episode of the series. This puts Pimbleton in the difficult position of having to choose between his friendship with Bayliss and his highly developed sense of moral justice. Ryland's name is eventually written on the board as a closed, cold case, but Bayliss's eventual fate is not revealed. In the epilogue, as the squad grieves over his off-screen death, G finds himself in a slightly otherworldly version of the squad room. He sees Adina Watson, whose murder occurred in the first episode of the series, and encounters the spirits of Beau Felton, who was killed in the line of duty while undercover, and Steve Corsetti, who had committed suicide at some point between seasons 2 and 3. Corsetti and Felton reveal that while the afterlife may physically resemble Earth, it lacks the worry that comes with living. G joins Corsetti and Felton for a game of poker, but has one last worry when they inform him that the fourth unoccupied chair is for the next casualty from the homicide unit. G asks if the chair is intended for his son, but Corsetti and Felton tell him there's no way of knowing. The film ends with a montage showing Al's interactions with his officers. It's got a spot for cultural references. Says G's doctor is played by Ed Begley Jr., who also played a doctor in the series St. Elsewhere. The closing credits confirm that Begley is in fact reprising his St. Elsewhere character. And that's the recap. And there's a little bit of other behind-the-scenes stuff on this, so I'm going to read a few other things before we get into discussion of it. This was from the Washington Post in February 2000. It says, when NBC executives approached Tom Fontana with the idea of a Homicide Life on the Street TV movie, he says he was indifferent at first. Quote, I was at that point, I think, emotionally trying to let go of the show. And I made what I thought impossible statement of, well, if you get all the actors back, I'll do it. Guess what? They did. Virtually all the regular characters from the series, including a couple of dead ones, turn up in Homicide the movie. We kept not committing to anything in terms of storyline until we knew which actors were coming, Fontana said. And when we found out they were all coming, it was such a feast that we got a lot of stuff in that we didn't think we'd get a chance to do. Fans should enjoy the feast as much as the cast and crew did. It's part family reunion, part tie-upper of loose ends from the series, and part good old-fashioned Homicide-style storytelling. While you don't have to be a devoted follower of the series to enjoy the movie, it helps to be a fan or to have one handy to keep the huge cast of characters straight. And this next part is just kind of a rehash of the plot again. The most surprising revelation in this montage of notification involves Giardello's son, Michael, formerly the FBI liaison to the squad, a job he took to reconnect with his estranged dad. He's now a street patrolman. Soon the old and new squad members have gathered like long-lost relatives at a wake, but not to mourn. They're itching to start, as Lewis puts it, looking for the Ebola what did this. Some of the old-timers have the boss's official okay to join the investigation. Others don't, but forge on regardless, following every lead. Drug dealers opposed to G's call for legalization. Black nationalists who blame him for their group's destruction. White supremacists whose reasons for not wanting a black mayor are obvious. In true Homicide fashion, things are not wrapped up in a pretty package. There are still the matters of Bayless's secret and Giardello's condition. Both are dealt with in a series of bittersweet scenes that may bring some diehard fans to tears. Fontana calls the movie a remarkable closure for us and a remarkable celebration for us. Whether that comes across in the film, you can decide, but we had a blast doing it. There was one other thing that I read before I watched the movie again, but I don't want to spend a bunch of time looking for it when I'm trying to do this. But there was another thing where bit of behind the scenes thing where they said that the reason how Jason Priestley got involved, that he was a fan of the show. And at that time, of course, Jason Priestley was known mostly for Beverly Hills 90210 and kind of had this image of, being the pretty boy, and the character being like the hero who can do no wrong. So it was actually Jason Priestley's idea when he got involved and they were wanting to play him to be a character for him to, the character to basically be incompetent and sort of a parody of the typical like cop show detective that
Oh, Jeff's mic went off. So have to fill for him. So then, Bradley, what I will say is that Peter Schiff made the point that any politician who wanted to legalize drugs would be assassinated by the mob. So I would have gone with that angle, because you might have got a little bit more action into it. Although I did like the all of the character stuff. Maybe could have extended it a bit more, get some more action in.
Okay, well, hopefully it makes it back in.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you. Yeah, it seems like they sort of just paraded the cast around just because they had to make sure they got everyone in. And some characters, obviously, like Mike was going to be a huge part of it, like regardless of I mean, basically, regardless of any other plot points, Mike was obviously going to be a huge part of it because his dad got shot. So, but in terms of, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that actor Esposito, I think it is, would have been happiest when he read that script.
Yeah, probably. But in terms of other detectives or former detectives, they could have done a lot more to make sure they just weren't having like one detective in for like one scene and that's it. Because I mean, they did a good job of making sure every detective got a piece of the case in terms of investigating it. But yeah, it would have been nice to see a lot more. I mean, they did show some of more detectives than others, and it would have been nice to see less of some and more of others. It's hard to argue with them having Pemberton be the hero because he's Pemberton. Granted, I've only seen like 2 episodes of him, but I sort of get it. Whenever Shepard said the mighty Pemberton, whenever someone mentioned his name, and then he comes in here and solves the case, denigrates Gotti into doing his job, and sort of then he comes down from the heaven and sort of cleans up everything.
I think,
or as much as he can.
I think they could have made the young hotshot detective characterized him a little bit better.
Yeah, he sort of went away after the complaint. He sort of like didn't come up again.
Yeah, he seemed to be just a device in order to get in Bayliss and Pemberton because he was bad in the interrogation room.
Obviously, I have no idea where I cut out.
Right. Okay. I'll turn you back up, Jeff, so that
turn me back up. Did you turn me down?
No. It was just that you were on. Well, you were on the medium setting, but that was still too quiet.
Okay, well, I don't know where I cut out, but what you just said was something that among the things I said that it was actually when Jason Priestley was signed on to be in the cast. He had this image, he was known from Beverly Hills 90210, so he had this pretty boy image, and the character was like, can't do any wrong, whatever. So when he wanted to be, he was a fan of Homicide and wanted to be a part of it, and he actually suggested to make his character as incompetent as possible, like sort of almost as a self-parody, and also parody of like cop shows that had, the detective like that just solves the case by strong-arming the witness with no thought put into it. So they found a way to do that.
It doesn't really come across as parody to me. It just comes across as, it's a badly written character.
Well, I don't think he was badly written. I just think he was designed to be a kind of like, when you and I talked about when Gaffney was first introduced, and he was kind of in there just to be a foil for Pemberton, where he was the original primary on the White Glove murder case, but obviously the whole thing was geared towards making Pemberton the one that solved the case eventually. So it was kind of similar to that in terms of having a character, and of course they sort of imply that that he got the job because he's somehow related to Gaffney.
I thought he might say son or dad. I thought that might.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like they might have cut something in there where it explained more what their relationship was, but obviously in some capacity, Gaffney's installed him in that position, so he was basically making it so even though Gardy's technically his boss, he's telling him what to do about it anyway. So
I did like the bit from him though. I mean, the character sort of redeemed himself when he said he was sorry, and he said, "Yeah, okay," and he just walked out.
So I don't know. I was reading. Did you even hear the whole description of the plot, or where did I cut out?
I think it was.
You already got through the whole plot, so.
Okay.
Yeah, and also, to be honest, I wasn't listening that much because I thought, well, I've already seen it.
So was at some point, did you hear any of the Washington Post review, or was that all not there anyway? You really weren't listening to a damn word I said, were you?
No,
whatever. Whatever.
I'm struggling to remember the content. I already
Well,
forgot.
we listen to it when it's your opinions, Jeff, but when you're reading the other people's opinions.
Well, I listened to
That's
you when
true.
you
That's
read
memorable.
that stuff from the Blake 7 book, and I pretended it was funny, and
Well, it was funny, and you were brutally honest when it wasn't, when it was, and when it wasn't.
Every once in a while, there was, they had a few funny lines. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked all the stuff about the drinks. He had a drink of pink.
Sorry, what was that last thing you said? Of course, ignore me. It's not ignoring you. When both of you talk, I can't understand either one of you. That wasn't intended to make silence happen.
That was yielding the floor.
All right, I guess. Well, I was going to say that I remember you reviewed you said that the Wikipedia recap, and then you gave like two or three other reviews and recaps, and I think somewhere in there you dropped out.
Okay, there wasn't much missed then. It sounds like probably just what I was saying about Jason Priestley that wasn't. And I don't even remember where I read that, but in the course of reading material about the movie, I happened to read about that. So,
Right.
Anyway, there's not a whole lot that I could find about like specifically most of the actors talking about the movie itself or the experience or anything. As far as what you were talking about giving each detective a spot, I overall think they did okay with that, though I would say that I think Howard should have had a little bit more to do than she did. But again, I don't know if that was... I don't know what all factors were involved. She may have only wanted to have a little bit. There might have still been some friction between her and Fontana and stuff, because I know there was some. So I don't know what the story with that is. Even just talking about how I would have done the script, I would have had her a little bit more involved. And yeah, of course, we haven't gotten to the big thing yet. I guess I should just go ahead and say it now. I hate that they had Bayless confess to murdering Ryland. That's my absolute least favorite thing about this movie. That entire scene is painful to watch. Now, it's still good performances by both guys. It's typically good of both of them. But I hate that decision to have that scene. And that's what keeps me from loving the movie. Otherwise, I would probably almost, give it a 10 or close to it, because I would overlook the flaws because it was so much fun. And it is still fun. There's all these little bits in it. It's like every time there was something where I'm like, oh, I can complain about this, then I was like, yeah, but this other thing was really good about it. So anything I could almost come up with to criticize other than that decision, I can justify all of them as being, well, it's canceled out by something good. So it's one of the very few times we actually have a mystery on Homicide, because Homicide's not a mystery show. Most of the time, we didn't have a situation where they showed us the murder or the shooting take place, and in fact even show the killer on screen and give us clues. In fact, they show him at least 3 times before we actually have him revealed as the killer, because he's also, of course, has the camera at the hospital in the scene where Mike is pushing him off of his grandmother. I think it's his grandmother, whoever that's supposed to be.
Yeah, grandmother,
yeah.
Grandmother, yeah.
So that part is very unlike Homicide. We haven't had episodes where they were like, keep showing us who did it before they actually reveal that that's the person who did it in these different situations. So that was actually, I thought that was a cool element that they added in this. It would be a little bit trite if that happened a lot, but to have it, one case where this occurs, is kind of interesting.
I'm sorry, just to quickly add to that, I think a movie is a really good place to have that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But certain things, of course, were typical Homicide in that when they reveal why the guy did it, you can sympathize with him, but also it's not necessarily something where you're like, well, the audience is really feeling he was justified. Even if you don't like the character of G, which, as a Homicide fan, you probably do, but even if somehow you were like, rooting for somebody to shoot him, you still wouldn't be like, this guy's justification really it makes much sense, which is again a very recurring theme on Homicide, where when they would look for an explanation or some kind of deep meaning behind why somebody would commit murder, a lot of times it's not really there. They're pretty simple reasons, and in this one it boils down to the guy lost his son and his wife, and he was just pissed off and needed somebody to blame for it, so she was a scapegoat. That and the drug dealer. Killing the drug dealer made a little bit more sense. This is more of a direct relation to his son's death. But to kill a mayor candidate in the hypothetical idea that he might somehow be able to legalize drugs, even though a mayor can't just snap his fingers and do that anyway. At least I don't think so. I don't know exactly how much power the mayor of Baltimore has, but I think that would be unlikely that he'd be able to do that, especially considering there's state and federal laws that can't just be ignored because you're in a city with a mayor that wants to do that anyway. But none of that stuff gets considered, of course, because the guy's not acting rationally. Which is sort of Pembleton's point after the fact when he's talking to Bayless about, there's a line that you don't cross, and saying, he calls him a lunatic. But, there's, again, a lot of little good scenes. The two medical examiners talking about, that he just got to the picture of Cox. I thought that was a good, amusing scene. Of course, I think Morgan said his favorite scene was the dream sequence with G taking him to breakfast or whatever. That was a good scene. We even had a scene thrown in there for the NF viewers to find some sort of symbolism of G in a swimming pool that's filling up.
That was cool.
So,
I was going to ask you about that, whether you liked it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of kind of elements in there. Yeah, if you can hear that, but Morgan said it's realistic in that people that are drugged up have weird dreams. So yeah, we have that. We have these scenes with Kellerman eating while Mike beats people up.
Yeah, he went a bit beta quad with her.
You have the investigating the videotape from every conceivable angle and seeing, have the concept of somebody strapping a gun into the camera was, something I'm thinking if that inspired anybody, if they saw this I want to go shoot somebody, I'll use a camera,
Yeah, it was a bit where it was a little, I mean, if the picture was higher quality, that would have been like a bit more, but it was like hard to see stuff on the image because the recording wasn't that sharp. So
yeah, it'd be interesting to see, how different it would be now with high definition cameras and stuff versus what they had then.
Well, everything that's recorded on film could be brought out in high definition because the actual film is very. That's why you can have these really old movies brought out on Blu-ray.
But if we're talking about the news camera, which I thought was what you were talking about.
Right, that would make sense because that wouldn't be super sharp anyway.
That would have been videotape rather than film. So
you got me there.
I did think there was a part of me that was kind of like it's a little bit cliche to have Pembleton, who's not even working as a cop anymore, kind of like what Bradley said, be the sort of savior that comes down and solves the thing. But on the other hand, it was the movie itself is sort of as as they say, a love letter to the fans kind of thing, and there's a lot of people kind of would be rooting for that. They're like, they wanted Pembleton back, and for him to be heavily involved in solving it was appropriate. It might have been a little bit better to have Bayless really be the one that found a way to put it down, considering if they were going to have the scene with the confession, that it would be like he solved it, but also, that was the point at which his own guilt came out or what he had done. But again, as I said, I would not have had that happen because I like the way the series ended with the audience getting to decide whether or not they think Bayless did it. And my decision is he didn't. My decision was he considered it. It was that he thought about it really hard, that he wanted to do it, but he wouldn't really do it. And obviously they made the decision to have him do it, and I disagree with that decision. So.
Yeah, I also, at least they left it a little bit open about Munch and Gordon Pratt.
Yeah, they still didn't reveal that one.
Yeah. Maybe even subsequently. Maybe there's a little callback to that in like subsequent stories that the character John Munch has been involved in other shows.
I don't know, but they do have reference to because they had Billy Lou show up and say that he had been telling the people in New York that she ran off with one of his fellow detectives, which of course they sort of implied that it was Gardy because he was the other one that really had a thing for Billy Lou. But from her saying that implies that didn't really happen. He just used that as an excuse. So they don't really reveal what really happened with their marriage either.
There was an interesting performance from the guy playing Garty when he looked at Billy Lou sort of like longingly. Oh, that was like the fish that got away. And so that was well played. That was interesting. The thing is he didn't really say anything to her, even though they were still they're in the process of having a divorce, aren't they?
Yeah.
Right.
But I liked, that again, it allows for interpretation of different things. When Pembleton says this thing about I quit Homicide because I couldn't take one more confession, this is the same guy who said taking confessions was like the thing that most excited him. So it's my view that he wasn't really completely serious about that. But the thing is, it's like it gave him an opportunity to sort of have another performance and make a little speech about stuff. And that's why I love about the scenes in this of Pembleton is you have some of, in a way, the best of Pembleton. And because you have these little moments where he does these little over dramatic things, like he gives him the $1, but then he won't let Bayless give him his $1. You're like, no, put that away. It's like, again, it was like, that's the little moments where I love that character because he's, he'll make you laugh, he'll make you think, but he'll also make you like cringe sometimes. Like, come on, man, what are you doing that for? But like, it's just his style to do it that way. So even in handling talking to Bayless, because he always, I think, viewed at it as he was sort of halfway messing with Bayless and halfway being serious with all these little tidbits of things he would pass on to him, even from the very first episode with this thing about the rules about, a guilty man falling asleep and all that kind of stuff. Like there were always those little tidbits where you weren't ever completely sure how much of the time he was being serious about the things he was imparting to Bayless. And what you have in the scene, of course, with the confession in the movie is that you see what happens when he changes to full-on serious mode where he realizes Bayless is telling him the truth and he has a completely different approach than he did leading up to it. So, again, good moments, good performances, even if I disagree with some of the choices.
I think that that thing about that whether he's serious or not, well, I think you'd notice in the character, even if he is telling the truth, he was like he might have been serious in that moment and then feel differently in a different moment. And so he could have been telling the truth in those two different situations.
Right. And I think it's an opportunity for me once again say just my general impression of the character of ESFPs is that we like having something to stress. Like there's a thing, whatever that thing is, like this is what we feel like is the thing to kind of play up right now. And it may not be something that we're really that intense about, but it's like, this is an opportunity, so we take it. And that's kind of how I feel like Frank is like, he'll just get, something will sort of hit him as this is a thing to make a point about or do a little performance about, and then he'll just keep it going because once you're in the moment of doing that, then you want to keep that feeling going. Like he said, it's a rush, so you just keep going in that moment, even if it doesn't necessarily make complete sense.
Pretty much the only typology that captures that is Kersey temperament theory.
Or the theory that you just said right now.
Oh yeah, there was a line from Frank. I think it was something like, "I didn't come here to make lists." That's first J's.
Yeah. Understood.
Yeah.
Where and the return of the S.J. Bolander, though he fibs a little bit, or maybe it's not a fib, but maybe he cheated a little bit on it because he says it's 0 sodium, but when they first show him, he's drinking a beer. So, although I suppose it's possible that there's no sodium beer.
Yeah, they could have like mentioned that, like, oh, what's that? Oh, they could have like brought that in about the low sodium beer.
But I did like the line about I can't even smell the ocean breeze.
That was good.
And just just again, those little moments for the fans, just having him say, "Don't agitate me, Munch," and you and I have never prowled the streets of anything.
Yeah, and also when he said Detective Munch, that he said in the first episode.
Yeah.
He said it about 3 times.
Yep.
And there's also a few Munchisms at the start. His conspiracy theories, things like that. And I like the scene with the African revivalist movement when he says a theory and he says, "Actually, that's pretty good. I believe in that."
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it was like, yeah, that makes sense.
No, do you want to join the Intuitives Club? Here's my card.
Yeah, and another good Frank thing when he was talking about the blue of the office.
Yeah,
and he notices the color and starts trying to name it.
Yeah, the shade.
Yeah.
I thought that the performance from what? Oh, is it Juan Carlos Exposito?
Carlos.
Giancarlo.
Yeah.
Oh, Giancarlo. Yeah, sorry.
I thought he was very good in it, and yeah, even with the first scene where you saw Kellerman in the car, just the way he moved, he has these little movements that remind me of EJR&D. And I've seen quite a few other people, I think, at ESTP move in that way. Do you think he moves in an ESTP way, Jeff, or is it?
Sure.
Certain of his expressions. It's like the way you say about some of Morgan's expressions are like EJR&Ds.
You said that before, I think.
Yeah.
I think specifically in the.
By the way, that scrub isn't the only ESTP.
In the scene.
Every other ESTP is like that.
The scene where he finds out that the judge that is in charge of the Georgia Ray Mahoney case, when he finds out that the FBI is investigating him, and where he shakes the guy's hand in the car. Remember that reminded you of him too. Yeah,
very EJR&D-ish that. Because because he is a good actor, Reed Diamond, so he's probably like tapping into what these people are like.
I saw him in something else, and he was very obviously the best performance in that terrible, terrible show.
Yeah, he also is the one who read the audiobook version of the Homicide book.
Ah. So what did Morgan just say there? Did he say the film was terrible? Did he say the book was terrible?
No, he said a TV show that Reed Diamond was also on. He said he was the best performance in that terrible show.
He said some guest character that he was out of place and how decently characterized he was compared to all the other people.
Yeah. Kind of like John Turturro in that Transformers movie.
Yeah, he's very good in that.
The movie was terrible, but John Turturro was good as always.
I like it when he changed his trousers because he was in a funk.
Yeah, sometime I should make an edit of that movie that contains like the 15 minutes worth of decent material on the whole thing. Most of it'll be him. Anyway, back to Homicide.
You saw good. I mean, you saw one of the things that good actors and actresses do is like, or rather, like when he was ill, he actually acted being ill or like under, recovering and, sort of recovering, but being injured and all of that. Like, I've seen some programs in England where you'll have a bad actor and they're all made up to be ill and they just talk normally in bed. And I'm just thinking, this is terrible.
Yeah, there's a running, joke about the soap opera where they'll show somebody in a hospital and the women are like, they still all their makeup is perfect and it looks like somebody just like kind of tousled their hair a little bit and said, okay, there you go.
With this, it's like the makeup makes them look like really bad and ill, but they're just talking normally. And I'm thinking, your jaw is supposed to be wired. There we go on screen.
Wait, go back to that.
Right, the first time Jeff nailed it by sending me that character.
Yeah, he definitely looks more like Weird Harold than Bart.
Yes.
The ears.
Yeah. Yeah, you've nailed it there with the Weird Harold. And that was when I first saw him, and I was thinking, who is this guy that looks rather too young and he looks like a cartoon character?
Yeah, you said that.
In terms of head shape, I think he does it more like Bart. But for everything else, probably looks more like Harold. Like he has a perfect like square head.
Yeah, I should have used a slightly different angle, but yeah, he does. Yeah, because when he was first in, he did look rather young, but I suppose he looks.
As I looked it up, and I said at the time he was already in his 40s when he was even at the beginning of Homicide. So
yeah. So I suppose
he looked younger than he was.
Yeah, so suppose it was like just old enough to be promoted to that position, and just young enough to really annoy G.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the thing is, with that the scene where when Barnfather got promoted after the other colonel retired, G wasn't upset about that, but then it was after he didn't get the captain job, and moreover that he was passed over for people that were less qualified and less experienced.
Yeah, but remember that was it Al Harris Jr. or Alfred? What's the name of the guy? The famous actor, and you like him?
Mixing up the names again, but yeah,
and like he deliberately promoted.
Harris is the character's name,
right? Yeah,
the actor is Al Freeman Jr.
Right. Yeah, and he deliberately picked
Gaffney. Yeah,
Gaffney, the lunch monster. What is he? The lunch thief.
Yeah, the lunch bandit.
Yeah, that makes him even. Oh, look! You got the Italian flag there on Giardello, really playing up the Italian angle. Get his base out.
I don't know. I thought that was actually pretty good.
He's the guy everyone doesn't like. He's the obvious choice.
Yeah, but it wasn't that obvious because they were making it like one of the detectives would have been the obvious choice.
Should have acted like he had it, and then
figured
out it wasn't actually.
That would have been even better. But I think I didn't mind it being Gaffney. That was okay. But anyway,
Jeff, I have a question for you. Have you seen Andre Braugher in other things?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, follow-up question. Do you think he's naturally ESFP, or is he just playing one in Homicide?
My guess would be yes, but I don't really know a lot about him personally. Like I've never really researched. I haven't seen a whole lot of interviews that he's done. I've seen a few, but not like extensive. But in the one interview that is on the Homicide DVD with him, it was actually about the subway episode, and the way he talks in that, like I certainly didn't see anything that ruled out ESFP for sure. I mean, he reacted similarly to the way that I feel like that I would have to what he was talking about, because he was basically excited about what he thought was sort of the opportunity to perform in an episode like that, and how it was sort of a unique episode, and the way that he got to the way it was handled, because he was talking about how some shows would have had like this trite happy ending added onto it, and he got sort of this big smile on his face when he's like, what I loved is that they were like, we're going to do this the right way, and he said like the conditions were like getting kind of frantic. They had only this amount of time to film in the subway, so it was like as they were counting down to trying to get this guy out of the subway, they were also like pretty much this is when you're going to be out of filming time, so you have to get it right on these takes. And it was kind of like, so he was talking about the pressure of it, and he was like getting kind of more excited as he was talking about that. So yeah, I mean that struck me that you know it would fit. But again, I wouldn't make like a claim that I know he's ESFP because I haven't really seen a whole lot of things about him personally.
It's almost as if with every actor and actress, your default type would be ESFP unless you hear anything else to the contrary.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of safe to do that just because there is a whole lot of us that are actors.
Yeah.
So you know that it's such a natural thing that it's you know you can't go wrong sort of starting with that as a template and then like you said seeing things that contradict that lead you in other directions. So
yeah. Because that's where you get like a combination of usually the person who's performing the role variant is likely to be the person of the corresponding type, although not necessarily.
Yeah, you can see interviews with actors where over the course of an interview, or over the course of a series of interviews, you can kind of have clues that maybe this person sounds more NF, you know, and always the thing with that is, you know, there could be other factors that sort of make them sound that way, or are they trying to sound that way kind of image-wise? They want to sound deep or whatever, you know. So you still have to sort of temper it, but, you know, sometimes over time you can kind of figure out, well, this actor probably really is an NF based on the way they express themselves and their attitude. I remember my friend Sasha, former coworker, was saying that she saw a thing about something about where actors were doing various sharing stories or things in some kind of group or something like that. And at one point, Drew Barrymore got up and was talking, and she and I had been talking about already that, you know, we thought Drew Barrymore might be an ENFP. And she said she did the hand, like the idealist bringing the hands together thing. So it was like even the hand gestures were giving away NF. So
I suppose anyway. It's when they do something that an SP couldn't bring themselves to do.
What's that, Ben?
I suppose it's when they say something that an SP couldn't bring themselves to say.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you know, again, it's like it goes back to that stuff we talked about where people have the bias where they're like, you know, oh, this actor's like gotten in trouble with the law or drugs or something. Well, they must be an SP because they're, you know, reckless, whatever. But then somebody like Drew Barrymore, so on the surface it'd be like, oh, if she was an SP because she got into drugs when she was like 12, 13 or whatever, you know. But then if you actually listen to what she talks about, her reasons for doing various things, then it comes off more NF. So anyway, I won't go on and on about her because she's not in the Homicide movie. But but yeah, I've never like spent a whole lot of time studying Andre Braugher in any capacity, so I don't really know. As far as his other performances, you know, he's played characters that were quite different than Pembleton, but yeah, and right, Morgan said, and some that are relatively similar to Pembleton. But I think his character on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, since he's the boss on that show, he comes off more SJ because I think that's just, again, sort of the role that he's.
Yeah.
Well, Morgan said he comes off exactly like Pembleton. I don't think so exactly.
Pembleton's done that thing before, like the face he makes, like because it's the same guy, same face. Like I can't get Pembleton in my head.
There's sort of a comedy template of the cop boss that's kind of has a certain goofiness to him, like the guy that George Gaines played in the Police Academy movies, the Commandant Lassard or whatever. So he kind of reminds me of that kind of, and so it's kind of hard to type that character because in a way there's sort of a stock character of like he's the authority figure that everybody kind of likes, but they don't really have that much respect for him because he's kind of a buffoon in some ways. So it's kind of like, anyway. So he doesn't, it's hard to tell because it's a comedy show, so he doesn't command anything anywhere near the respect that Pembleton did as a detective on a show that's trying to be realistic. So it's kind of hard to compare those. But anyway.
Yeah, so you can see how Ballard and Stivers were a little bit more glammed up for this.
Yeah, dress up for the movie. Tease that hair out. I don't know what either one of them had been doing in that year in between, so maybe they, were doing roles that called for that kind of look.
At least the actress playing Kay Howard didn't succumb to the...
Yeah, and she always made a point of that because in the very first episode, she said it was like the one time where they made her wear makeup, and then like after that, they kind of relaxed on that. But that was always a clash with the network because they wanted, the females to be more attractive. So there was always a clash there, and she wanted it to be more realistic. Well, she wanted to be more realistic. Like, this is what an actual female cop looks like. She was based on a real person. She met that real person. They had pictures of that real person. They're like, she doesn't, wear stuff calling attention to her looks on the job. She already has enough attention on the job being the only female detective at that time. So she didn't do things to try to play up, hey, look, I'm a female. Except, the one exception to that might be if it was like an interrogation situation where it could actually help her get a confession, she might try to kind of play on that a little bit. But it wouldn't be by, dressing that way and putting on a bunch of makeup every day for a job.
So this series is good for showing the sort of like tactics used by SPs.
Yeah, seeing that guy reminds me, I have one impression I need to do. If you want to freeze it right there, Ben, on the...
Okay, I'll just get back.
Yeah, go back. Can you give me $1? Just $1. There you go. There's my fantastic impression of that guy.
Yeah.
Of the Negro persuasion.
Yeah. See, that's only twice as good as my impressions.
Come on, let me have $1.
Right then.
Yeah.
I think now that Mike's back on the screen, I will say one of my least favorite parts of or at least one of the least Homicide things about the movie was the way he went off the rails. Not to say it wasn't entertaining to see him. It wasn't. It was entertaining to see him throw people into bushes and go around beating up people. But in terms of I guess that they were
a hothead.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like, Morgan said he was a poorly written character, but I would say less as poorly written as just inconsistent. They never seemed to have a handle completely on what they wanted to do with him. And so if somebody was just watching the movie and thought, well, this is what he's always like, they're like, how did this guy even, they're probably just being like, it's a nepotism thing where his dad got him a job as a cop because he doesn't seem like he's real suited for the position. Even though he says in the movie that the opposite was true, that he doesn't even know if his dad realizes what he's doing now. So apparently he didn't do that, but that's sort of the impression you would get because he doesn't come off.
So he didn't go around beating up a bunch of people, but he did have that same expression of the emotion was not something that was new. He's displayed that before.
And to an extent, in the episode about the bus driver that got beaten by the crowd, and he kind of has the confrontation with Gardy about racial relations or whatever you want to call it. So you saw some of those same kind of emotions rise up in that scene.
And
and so you can kind of say, well, he's distraught about what happened to his father, so he's kind of going overboard, but it just seems a little bit over the top, like him shoving the cameraman and camera woman. But even though that was a funny scene, having her recover from that to finish her report, it was still kind of a little bit over the top. But
she was really in his face, though. I can imagine somebody.
I don't really fault him for doing that either. I think the thing that really got me was that no consequences after the fact. They didn't even really talk about it.
But the woman was happy, sort of like the way she came up and she was talking about how visibly upset. So it's like she might be one of these people who's not that offended by that.
Well, yeah, but it's not about like her. It's about like the higher ups. Like basically anyone. Whenever like something that comes up where a police officer is doing something to make the department look like people like on that like very quickly. So it's not so much that that he did it; it's that they didn't really address it in any capacity. So they should have at least addressed it, even if they didn't make like a huge big deal.
Yeah, you have to maybe cover it with one line because you wouldn't have a whole scene devoted to it because that might be dead air.
Yeah, I'll say that. Yeah, it's like one of the things that's like the most incongruent with based on what I've seen of Homicide. It's like one of the things which is like glaringly inconsistent.
I remember in a previous plot, Jeff bringing to the attention that the fact that why they investigate in this case, it's not a murder yet, but you can sort of believe it in this case where because it's it's a guy they respect.
They always treated cop shootings as being like red balls, and regardless. So everybody was involved, not just the homicide unit. Same thing with child kidnappings. They said the homicide would get involved in that.
Did they have that thing where you go to prison for longer if you kill a police officer? Because I remember they saying 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, because at least I know at least in most states that's considered capital murder, which is actually higher than first-degree murder. So.
Yeah, because these were the same thing in England as well. 30 years for killing a police officer.
I'm not sure about in Maryland and whether that's different now than it was at that time either, because I know some of those laws changed in the last 20 years or so, because one of the things that I remember presidential candidates would run on would be things like making it a capital murder for someone who like killed somebody in the process of like a drug sale or something like that. I don't know, things because they were trying to deter drugs, so they were trying to say we're going to have this harder sentence for someone who like used a weapon involved in a drug thing or something,
They never served their full sentence anyway, so you might as well say 50 years because they always like bring them out early on good behavior. So,
well, not always, but that's
not always.
There are quite a few people who don't get paroled. They kind of tend to focus on those who do that end up committing further crimes because it's a nice sensationalist thing to cover in the news and be like, and try to hammer politicians with it like they did Dukakis back in '88 with the Willie Horton thing. So, it's a convenient thing for people to find the ones that did, but there's plenty of the ones that don't. So,
but to me, it's just like a lie when they say somebody is sentenced for this amount of years and then they don't serve that sentence.
Yeah, well, I agree with you on that. And honestly, for me, this is a big tangent, but I would say that there would be less people, I think, who were calling for death penalty for crimes if they felt like life in prison really meant life in prison. If there wasn't the possibility of parole, or if there were just longer sentences to begin with for cases where somebody got killed, where somebody tries to weasel out of it with excuses like being intoxicated and stuff.
Yeah.
That things like that where they're not legitimate defenses in my view, and they get people much shorter sentences for things that shouldn't be the case. But anyway.
Yeah. Plus, there's a whole thing about like overcrowding in prisons.
Well, yeah, I think it's also like just to give the prisoners a carrot. I think one of the things that they use as a carrot is no visiting rights, and so otherwise there'd be prison riots all the while for the guys that are not going to get out anyway. But I would prefer they'd be banged up for a hell of a long time.
I'll just say one more thing. Because I don't want to open up a whole line of discussion of that. I'll just say that the prison overcrowding thing, there's one really simple way you could help reduce that. And I think I'll just say that to bring it back to Homicide, that the G was on the right track with that. In terms of possession of drugs being something that puts you in prison is kind of a joke. But anyway.
Yeah, especially if you frame it as, well, why do you think all of these murderers and rapists are being let out early? It's because we've got to make room for all these people.
Yeah,
drug offenses.
It's just as ridiculous as the way that they've used tobacco as this huge scapegoat and gone after it for years, and marijuana even also. But then alcohol gets treated as something that's just well, we just have to accept that's a part of. But then there's alcohol results in far more deaths than either tobacco or marijuana. So,
yeah, and
anyway,
not just the deaths of the person who's using it, but to other people.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, we haven't said anything much about the final scene with the afterlife scene. What did you guys think about that one?
I liked it. You know, I think that was okay because it enables you to bring the characters in that are already dead. And I think that although it came out in February, it probably came out before Gladiator, which won the Oscar, and it had that scene at the end with Maximus. Was it Decimus? Oh, anyway, the Maximus guy played by Russell Crowe, and he goes into the afterlife at the end of the film. So it was almost like
thanks, Ben. You just spoiled it. It's this movie that I haven't seen from 18 years ago.
Why haven't you seen it?
Yeah, I was just gonna see it. I was just gonna watch it tomorrow. So it's totally ruined it. There's no point anymore.
You just ruined it. I'm sorry.
Oh no!
Terrible.
No, terrible spoiling.
But yeah, as you know, I liked having Cressetti and Felton back. I didn't really like the writing of that scene. I would have written it differently because it's like it's sort of cliches. But the only thing that I did like about it is that they don't come out and exactly say where they're supposed to be, because Cressetti makes a joke about, what do you think this is, heaven? You know, like, is he saying it's hell, or is it purgatory, or is it some other place? Like, he doesn't even really say.
Right.
It's more like purgatory, I suppose.
Yeah,
I mean, they are Catholic.
Yeah, that part kind of, you know, I was like, all right, that's, you know, and that actually, to me, is somewhat inspirational, in that I have this idea that, you know, people are always saying they don't have time to do everything they want to do, and I feel that way a lot. And it sort of gives that hope, like you'll have this opportunity where you're not completely removed from, you know, your body or your life. Like some visions of the afterlife, it's like either you have no tie whatsoever to your previous thing. You're just like, you're completely separated from your body or anything from your previous life, and you're just in this total separate thing. And so, I don't know. To me, maybe I'm just weird, but to me, that sort of makes me feel like some hope there will be sort of this transitional thing where you do kind of, you're still like in your life, but it's, you know, like you said, you're not worried about the things that happened before. So
I think this
anyway.
This surgeon here could have been like an ESTP surgeon.
Yeah, again, this was maybe the best scene Mike has in there, where he has the confrontation with the doctor, because they both react completely realistically. The guy laying it on them, the guy saying something about, this is refreshing, a doctor, you know, telling me what's up. And he's kind of thinking, yeah, so you're welcome. And then he's like, I'm not thanking you. And then he's expressing his being pissed off at the other people that really didn't have much to do with what he had. So it's kind of like, you know, and he's like, look, I was in the middle of playing golf, which then kind of makes it be like, not have sympathy for the doctor. But then he talks about how he shows up and there's, you know, it's a war zone, there's bullets flying there, and then you're like, okay, comes back a little bit. So in the course of just that one little conversation, you kind of go all over the place. So it's pretty effective, I think.
Yeah, plus a lot of, it's like what we were saying about a lot of actors and actresses being ESFP, a lot of surgeons ESTP.
Yeah, that's true. And so, you know, honestly, in that sense, I'm totally on his side in terms of, I don't care about his golf game, but I'd like to have a doctor that's straight with me.
Yeah.
You know, but also doesn't just act like, you know, I'm wasting his time. And I didn't think when he did that initial, like when he broke down, here's everything about it, he didn't come off that way at that point to me. He just came off like, here's what, you know, what's going to happen, you know, which that I agree with what Mike actually said. Even if he was being sarcastic, it was refreshing to have a doctor that did that. And especially in a TV show, because even though, like, within the context of this, they're not on a TV show, but it really is. Because you see so many TV doctors that are portrayed as, like, being these ultra, like, idealistic almost. Like,
yeah, Dr. Kildare kind of people.
And the reality is, obviously, most doctors aren't really like that. And so, you have this kind of false sense of, the TV doctor that's always like doing this intense thing about every patient, when the reality is more like the episode NYPD Blue I watched last night, where the doctor didn't remember the patient they were talking about, because it's like, how am I supposed to remember this guy?
Yeah, and to see so many people, and quite a few of them are SJs. I thought that when Michael had that dream about his father getting off, it was like Al Giardello was having like an ENFP moment, the way he was behaving there.
Yeah. Oh.
I think you just cut out there, Jeff, when you were doing your impression. So if we could have an encore.
I'll risk it. My cholesterol's down.
All right.
Yeah, that was probably the most fun he got to have in the movie, because he didn't have a whole lot of scenes, but he got to do that. So.
Oh yeah, I thought it was interesting. When Lewis and Shepard went to the what is it, sort of like Aryan Nation white supremacist radio station, and they were very dignified in the radio station, and sort of like well handled.
Yeah, well, I mean, they knew what they were getting into, so so like no real surprises.
Yeah, but I just thought it was like setting a good example for like outclassing the person.
And it did kind of seem like that was a little bit out of character for Gardy to have set it up that way, like that somebody would have said, hey, wouldn't it make a little more sense to send the white cops to the white supremacist guy and the black cops to the black supremacist guy or whatever.
Then those scenes would have been boring, and you probably cut them out.
Yeah, and that's the point for TV. But it did seem like he would have been like, you're right. Maybe I should flip that.
Yeah.
Well, then again, it's more points for Pemberton for calling him out.
Yeah, people under pressure.
Yeah, I did like that line where Pendleton says, like, I never had much respect for you.
Yeah, it was like,
yeah,
it's funny.
Yeah, that was a bit.
But at least that part was true to it, like in terms of how Gardy ended up in the Homicide Squad from the beginning. They had that whole thing about how the cops didn't trust him because of what had happened when he was a uniform cop and he didn't go into the housing project when the two dudes were shooting at each other. So there was that sense of mistrust about him, and it was sort of exacerbated by now he's in a boss position, and he's kind of being just a yes man for Gaffney.
I remember seeing something on Everybody Loves Raymond about police officers retiring after 20 years, and he was saying that he was in his 50s. And he said something like, "Look, I'm 54. I'm not in the."
Well, I'll forgive you for bringing up that terrible show. And we can move on.
Yeah, you just didn't like it because you didn't like the parents. One of your.
Well, that was the worst part, but it wasn't really that good even without them. I don't think Ray Romano was very funny, so.
Okay. Certainly not the best actor.
Best part of Patricia Heaton was the best part, just because
she was excellent in that. So about what was it to say about her, Jeff?
She's good looking, but
that's true.
A little bit of eye candy, but other than that, I didn't think the show was that good or very good at all. Anyway.
Yeah, and she had the ability to cry in a funny way.
Sure. Yeah. So, anyways, anything else to say about the amazing Homicide movie?
Mention that, but just going back.
I know you didn't like the Bayless and Pendleton scene, but I did enjoy the fact that it took Pendleton so long to understand the fact that it took him so long to sort of process that Bayless killed someone in cold blood. He was like, "Wait, what? Wait, what? No, you're joking." And then eventually he was like, "Okay, so I already cleared you." Bayless was like, "No."
It's not even that I don't like the scene. It's I don't like the choice to have Bayless actually be the one who killed him. So I disagree with that being the case. But within that context, the scene is still good because they both give good performances, and they're true to their character in the way that they act in that scene. And it's like that it even has the point where, the line about Bayless asking him to absolve him, and he says, "I can't."
Yeah,
and he's like, "For some reason, I thought you could," and that's great too, because another typical Homicide, there's not going to be this great like thing where he's like, "Oh, I forgive you" or something like that. He's like, "I can't do that." Oh, and it's sort of this awkward end to the scene.
Yeah, it's like, and it also gives you an example of like the difference between the introverted feeling between like the NFPs and the SFPs, where every now and then it will come out.
What do you mean specifically about that?
Well, they're sort of like their strong ethics, where a lot of the times it's situational, and you can say that they're like fooling with people, and they'll give off a certain image in that. But then every now and then they'll strong ethics will come through. Whereas with the NFPs, they sort of like abstract from their ethics, and it's like they're always talking about ethics all the while and trying to stick to a system of it across different situations.
One thing that when I saw in the picture reminded me of that, like virtually every suspect that they went to or place they went to for suspects had the sign of G's opponent. So I thought that was a nice touch, that it was like every one of them is like, we're telling you up front, we're for the other guy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so the bit about, you mentioned there, Bradley, about Junior G, but he did get angry at the end of the hostage episode when he killed his children, or one of his children.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying
it's not about the anger. Wasn't the part that I had a problem with. Like the anger is perfectly acceptable, and it's, yeah, we've seen it before. It's just the no fallout, no consequence, not even mention of it.
Okay, fair enough.
What really struck me.
Yeah, and I also wonder, the guy that was with Barnfather, they never actually said who he was. We can only assume like he was the new chief of police, maybe, because they don't really ever say that. So there's a few like things in there that were just maybe cut for time or something. I don't know, but Danvers gets credited as part of the main cast, but he really doesn't do much other than just this one little scene. So
it just picks up a nice thing. I think I'm going to put the guy in the trash bucket. He'll get in the thumbnail.
The guy. Oh, okay.
So will the Admiral. But she played Admiral Kane in Battlestar Galactica. Oh yes, and even G had like an SI moment when he was talking about the food and living the good life in when he visited Italy. So he usually has these tales that are sort of very Guardian-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about things like that on Friday. We were talking about how Guardians relax. And you probably think they're still boring when they're relaxing, don't you, Jeff?
Yeah, maybe. In a way. My thing is, it seems like a lot of them, they really don't know how to relax because they're always still like worried about stuff, even when they're trying to go on vacation. Yeah, like that state of concern that they want to be in for their self-esteem.
Do you think the SFJs are better at sort of like enjoying friends and family? And
not necessarily.
Right.
I think they just worry about different things.
Right. So I've pretty much mentioned everything. Bradley, you've not really held forth on this episode, so do you want to go in one of your roles?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't have as much Homicide to pull from, so a lot of it was most of the interactions were fairly new to me, so sort of just watching it from that view.
It's not on screen now anymore, but Brody was, that's the one that Ben keeps referring to as the little NF guy. So if you've heard him refer to, that's what he's talking about.
Oh, I see. All right, that's good. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's as good as I was expecting. Homicide has I come to expect a certain level of quality from Homicide, and it met that level. So. So it's good.
And also, you notice how all those people turned up. They all acted pretty well, didn't they? All those characters you've not seen before.
Well, it's not that I hadn't seen them before. I just don't have the same
right. Okay.
same familiarity as some of the like season 7 cast. So
yeah, that's why it's a little bit hard for me to score it, because like I enjoy it a lot. It's fun. It certainly has some flaws to it. Some things that are, require a little bit of a suspension of disbelief more so than usual for Homicide. And like I already said, my disagreement with the decision to have Bayless confess to murder, that decision to have him be the one that did it. And I'd say, even if you want to say you wanted to have left it open that maybe he did, I would have been fine with that. But to conclusively have him say yes, he did it, I didn't like that. But so that brings it down, but not enough for me to say that I don't enjoy it, because I still do. It's just that's the one thing that really eats at me a little bit in terms of my enjoyment of it.
Does that make it even worse for you, Jeff, that, it would have been great, but it's just that one thing? Like, if it was terrible, it might actually be...
Yeah, because okay, if it was... Yeah, if the movie itself was stupid, but it was still like, well, they brought back the old characters and made kind of a dumb episode, I would be like, in some ways, I could enjoy it more, because I would be like, it was still fun, to have everybody back, even if it wasn't a good script. But instead, they they have this pretty good script with a fatal flaw in it and some great performances. So I'm like, I can't hate it, but I can still hate that one decision.
Yeah. It's little things like that are called Jeff's FI moments. It's like...
I don't even know if it would be that, but it's just it's just a personal preference.
Yeah.
Or my belief that what they did with the character of Bayless was not how I would have done it. But that's okay. I mean, that they don't have to do it the way I would have done it, but it just, even some of the other things they did with them beforehand, I'm like, it was more convincing, and in the final episode, that's why to me that Forgive Us Our Trespasses is so good, is because the character, what they do with Bayless in that episode is really good and consistent with what had happened up to that point. And so that's why it didn't quite ring true to me, is that I feel like that the Bayless of the final episode, yes, he'd become more violent. Yes, he was driven to something that he wouldn't do in previous times. But I still think in that moment of, is he going to actually kill this guy? That I think that it would have been good to have had, whether they showed it or not, but even if they did show it, a moment where that moral core of Bayless came out, where no, I'm not going to cross that line, just like Pembleton said. Like, this guy, yes, he may deserve to die, but I'm not the one who's responsible for doing that.
Yeah, but I could also see his moral core as that would be the justice for him.
Yeah, but that seemed more like, honestly, that seemed more like a Lewis thing. Like, if there had been somebody who would have done it for that reason, I could see Lewis doing it, because, what, like he did with the, having Mahoney's crew taking each other out. Like, he was obviously willing to cross that line in a way where he wasn't the one doing the actual killings, but he was setting them up. It was pretty obvious what was going to happen based on what he did. So he had already shown he was willing to go that far, whereas there wasn't anything. The only thing Bayless had shown up to that point was he killed a man in self-defense, in the episode with the homeless guy. But there wasn't anything where he really got close to that. And so to just say it was true that he had shown himself to be, from the beginning, he was a marksman. He had been on the, mayor's security detail. The whole thing was he was one of the better shots. But that itself doesn't mean that, yes, he could realistically have pulled it off from what he had learned in Homicide and how he was in terms of he wasn't going to miss when he decided to shoot the guy. He was going to do it effectively. But I still think that he would have stopped himself from doing it. And so, and I felt like that in scene where he leaves, it was like that was his way of getting away from the place he was at where he would do that. So that's, to me, it makes much more sense to say he had scared himself to the point he was thinking about actually killing Ryland, that he would say, I got to take a break from this because I've been driven to this point, and that's why he left, not because he actually did it.
But I get the impression, though, that the way the actor played it, in say the final episode, I got the impression that that he might have bumped him off Ryland.
Well, yeah, obviously that impression was meant to be left, that he could have done it. But what I'm saying is, what I believe would have been better for the character is if that had been his leaving was because he was escaping the where he had where he had gone. He didn't want to be there anymore in that place where he would consider killing someone, and not that he had actually done it.
Was it true that was it true that Pemberton had never killed anyone while he was a detective? Because I remember that being a pretty remarkable detail.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess it must have.
They certainly never showed him shooting anyone. So I don't think that was like a continuity error or anything. If he had done something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't anything like that. It's just it's atypical, especially in TV shows, because pulling a gun is such like a major plot device. So to me, it struck me as pretty remarkable that the Pemberton character never killed anyone.
Well, I mean, I would say most of the detectives didn't. Like G, they in the movie they had a flashback to the guy that he shot, and he said at the time in that episode it was only the second one that he had shot in all of his years, from a patrol cop all the way through being a lieutenant, which was like whatever it was, 25, 30 years or something. So, I don't know about on SVU or anything like that, but I know on Homicide they never had Munch shooting anybody either. Yeah, so I mean, most of the detectives I don't think had shot anybody's, at least not as homicide detectives. It could be that some of them, when they were uniform cops earlier in their career, may have, but they don't spend much time talking about the previous, the early years of most of the characters. So you don't really go into that a lot. I think G probably shares more about his than any of the others do. Every once in a while, there's a few lines about it from one of the characters, but they don't. There's not a whole lot about that. That'd be another thing, in addition to what I said about doing like homicide audio stories. Like they recently had the Han Solo movie, like the early years of Han Solo. You could do like the homicide detectives before they were homicide detectives.
Yeah, you could get loads out of that. The early years of Han Solo, with the nature of the character.
So you could have like, what was Pemberton like when he was a uniform cop, or Well, just because you don't want to see it, Morgan, doesn't mean anyone else wouldn't.
Lewis in a different hat. I can watch that.
Yeah, Lewis, like the evolution of Lewis's hats over the years. See, Lewis was one that actually did talk a little bit about when he was a patrol cop, because he had that scene that you remember, that really good confrontation in the bar.
Yeah.
With Luther Mahoney,
yep.
Where he talked about using the nightstick to and telling the to clear the corner.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he gave that example of like, because yeah, we can talk about that when we sort of like do
that. That's another reason I could see Lewis as being the one that offed Ryland if he was driven to it, because he could be the guy that put the gun to him and said, you're not going to do this again, as far as like killing people on the internet or whatever. Like, that's the last one you're going to do. And if the guy still gave him the same attitude, like, I'm going to keep doing whatever I want to do, I could see Lewis pulling the trigger. Whereas Bayless, I think, would have stopped himself. So, anyway.
Right, so the people who have watched a lot of episodes before, when we've been referring to people's types, we suggest you read this book by David Kersey.
All right, so I all things being considered, I can't give the movie any less than a 7, because that's kind of like my baseline for good Homicide, and I think the touch of nostalgia that's from bringing back the old characters and kind of the specialness of it brings it up to an 8 for me. So I'll give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I think I'll also give it an 8 out of 10.
Jonathan's not sure, but I'll give it an 8 as well.
Well, we're all in agreement in our final.
Kellerman eating 10 out of 10. Would watch Casual Violence again.
Okay. So Morgan specifically gave Kellerman eating and the Casual Violence a 10. So.
Oh yeah, that was good with his eating in it. In the EJ R&D way. Just the ESTP way.
It must be nice to watch someone else beating up someone for a change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
No judgment, of course.
Thank you to our huge audience for watching the final Homicide review. And join us next time where we will do an overview of the whole series, and hopefully Ben and I will count down our top 10 episodes. And of course, Bradley is welcome to join us for that if he wants to, even if he hasn't seen enough episodes to do that yet. So
I forgot we were going to do that. I thought we were going to go straight to the Algiardello portrait of an ESTJ.
No, we did one for Blake 7. We got to do one for Homicide.
Okay, fair enough.
Just like we said, we're not going to try to rank all the episodes like we did with Blake 7 because it would take like 40 hours or something to try to do that.
Oh yeah, and I'm thinking this might end up being a. Did you say you were going to do the top 10?
That's what I'm thinking would make sense.
Yeah,
dude. For us to do our top 10. So Ben, you can look at the episode guide and go through and refresh your memory.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. Look through IMDb.
And I will do the same thing, and I already know what my top 2 are, but I'll have to think about the rest of them. So all will be revealed in a soon near future hangout, maybe even next week.
Yeah.
2 viewers or whatever.
Right then, so I'll stop it now then.
All right, bye.
Bye. So we all got 8s. We all gave 8s.